Hello, I'm Bernard Norcott-Mahany, your instructor, and we are moving on to finish Chapter 5 and actually Chapter 6, so we're going to be rushing through this. The end of Chapter 6, the last two sections, I, I think Maurizio does not do a great job with those two, and I won't really comment on those in this because I'm going to look at five things. But I, some of the things she says, I think, are not really borne out by scholarship. So I think those two parts of the book may be the weakest parts in the whole book. So without further ado, then let's get to this. So the scholarship for Chapter 5 takes the position that myth can challenge social norms. And we get specifically the adonia and the idea of women laughing. So the scholarship here counters what we had in Chapter 4. In Chapter 4, Helene Foley argued that the myth of the Eleusinian Mysteries and the Homeric hymn number 2 to Demeter tended to support the patriarchal view of marriage. And this runs counter to some of the feminist scholarship, but she feels that scholarship, though its aims are admirable, is not really supported by the facts. Here, a guy named Winkler talked about going to a conference, and the conference was one of the papers he heard was on the Adonia, this festival in honor of Adonis. Part of that festival involved women planting a plant which would flower very quickly, like within a day, and then by the end of the festival, so like in 3 or 4 days later, it would already have wilted and failed. So, and the women at this festival were known for laughing. And what were they laughing at? Winkler says what he suggests is that women here are laughing at men think they're so powerful, but male power, which is associated with the phallus, it tends to be sort of like it builds up, but then it goes away, and then it's just like limp hanging there. And so, unlike women's sort of sexual power, which is more long-lasting, everlasting type thing, the male power is sort of sudden, and then it's over. And so, he feels that women through this festival did have a sense of their own power. I would agree with that. I think that's true, but the point is, doesn't change the fact that you've got patriarchy. So yes, it does give women a relief from patriarchy, but it doesn't get rid of patriarchy. So in that sense, it may challenge it briefly, but then it's over. So that challenge is sort of a release of tensions rather than building up to some sort of overthrow of the system. Moving on to the comparison section. Here, because this is the Aphrodite chapter, the comparison is again to Ishtar, and specifically a passage in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh, the main character, rejects Ishtar. So Ishtar comes on to Gilgamesh, wants to go to bed with him, and he refuses her. And he's pretty brutal about it. Is an appealing idea, but what's going to happen is to these other people that you went to bed with, bad things happen to them afterwards, and I don't want that. So no thanks, but no thanks. Now, keep in mind what Anchises' initial ploy is with Aphrodite in Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, and it's somewhat similar. Now, he's much more polite, but then again, Anchises is fully mortal, whereas Gilgamesh is 2/3 God, right? So he's partially mortal, and he is mortal. He will die, but he has a lot more sort of God stuff in him than Anchises. So that might be a reason for Anchises' more polite refusal. But anyway, keep that in mind when you read the brief selection from the Epic of Gilgamesh. The reception section, the Nachleben section, looks at the story of Pygmalion, the way Pygmalion is told in 4 Hollywood films. Those films are Pygmalion, which was based on George Bernard Shaw's play about Eliza Doolittle, a flower girl in London, who is sort of adopted by Henry Higgins, who's a professor of linguistics, who teaches her how to speak like a lady, and therefore she becomes a lady. That, of course, was remade as a musical, My Fair Lady, which is also one of the films discussed. They also discuss Pretty Woman, which has the same rough storyline, right? That the character of Julia Roberts is actually transformed in the course of the film. And then there's the film Lars and the Real Girl, which sort of reverses that, where Lars, in a sense, might very well be the figure that needs changing. And the real girl is a blow-up doll, so she is not actually real, though everyone pretends that she is. So that storyline is based on a Greek story. We have the Roman version of it told by Ovid in his Metamorphoses. Pygmalion was a sculptor on the island of Cyprus. He already tended to look at women with he sort of condemned women, saw them as being largely of no account, but even more so after the women were caused by Aphrodite to become sex crazed briefly. They had insulted Aphrodite, and so she turned them all into sort of sex crazed women who were basically, screwing in the street, and all sorts of other stuff was happening. So the rather prudish Pygmalion, the sculptor, says, I don't want any of that stuff. But as he sculpts a woman, a statue of a woman, he, of course, all of his erotic thoughts go into the statue. He falls in love with the statue. And finally, when there's the next year, when there's a festival in honor of Aphrodite, he prays to Aphrodite that he have a woman just like his statue. And when he returns home, the statue has become real. And that's sort of what we have in the Pygmalion narratives that in films. The four are not the only ones. There are a bunch of others, but where a male figure creates a female image, ideal, and then falls in love with the figure who is actually different than the ideal, right? Eliza Doolittle, though she becomes a lady, she actually remains independent somewhat of the whole patriarchal system, and that's something that then Henry Higgins has to deal with. And so there's this challenge within the system in the modern film versions. And one of the things you can do towards the end of the term, if you need extra credit points, is you can actually watch one of those four films and do a report on that. So keep that in mind down the road if you need the extra credit points. Moving on to Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is about Athena and Poseidon, but it's mainly about Athena. And the literature section from Chapter 6 is Athena in the trial scene from the Eumenides, which is part of the trilogy called the Oresteia. So it's a play by Aeschylus, the Eumenides, part of the Oresteia, which was a trilogy. Aeschylus tended to write his plays. Every Greek tragedian, when they had a performance, they would perform three of their works, three tragedies together. But Sophocles and Euripides do not seem to have done trilogies at all, whereas Aeschylus seems to have liked the idea of trilogies, where you have three plays, but it's one big story arc. And the big story arc of the Oresteia is the birth of justice. So the movement from blood vengeance, right? Someone kills someone in your family, you kill someone in their family, then then it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's blood vengeance, right? So gang warfare would be blood vengeance. Civic justice takes that out of the hands of the people who are committing the thing, and it puts the judgment of that in the hands of regular citizens who are not as invested in it, and therefore can maybe view the thing more independently, more judiciously than the participants, right? In a vengeance system, someone kills someone in your family, you have to kill someone in their family. There's no wiggle room. You have to do that, right? That's the only way things even out. But the problem with that sort of system is you end up basically the family that has the most people is the one who wins, right? If family A has 12 people and family B has 8 people, family A is going to win because they're going to have some leftovers when all of family B is gone. So it's not a great system. A lot of bloodshed in that system. So taking that and giving it to the courts and having them judge impartially on the merits. Was this really murder? Was it something else? Was it justifiable homicide? That type of thing. So the Eumenides is the final play, and in it we have a trial, the trial of Orestes for killing his mother. He did kill his mother, but he killed his mother seeking vengeance for his father. Right, so he's getting vengeance for his father, he kills his mother. The Furies, who are the prosecutors, argue it doesn't matter his reasons, he killed his mother. His mother could be, like the female version of Adolf Hitler. Doesn't matter. He killed his mom. End of story for the Furies. So the prosecution's point of view is it doesn't matter. He did kill her. He admits killing her. End of story. He's guilty. The defense argues that the gods, Zeus and Apollo, actually told Orestes that he had to do this, and that he was justified in doing it because when Clytemnestra killed her husband, Agamemnon, though he is not a blood relative, he was the king, and therefore this is a major crime, and there had to be some vengeance, and Orestes then, got that vengeance. And so therefore he's not guilty of murder. It's justifiable homicide. So that's the trial set up. The jury hears the evidence, then they declare a verdict. So keep that in mind when you read the thing. It's the end of a trilogy. In this case, it's a trilogy. We have all 3 parts, so we know this trilogy. We can look at this trilogy as a whole: the Agamemnon, the Libation Bearers, and the Eumenides, and we can get a sense of that story arc. One thing that Maurizio does that's unfortunate is she leaves out the part after the verdict, which is, I think, the most important part, because in that part, Athena convinces the Furies not to take it out on Athens, right? They had threatened that if the judgment went against them, they would destroy the city of Athens. And she convinces them not to do that, but instead to join Team Athens as protectors of the city, which they accept. So that's important. That's an important idea, that they actually accept that, position, because that's really the thing that finally ends vengeance, right? When finally the spirits of vengeance themselves accept to be part of a city that is based on justice, then that the side of justice has won. So it is unfortunate that she cut that out. The scholarship in Chapter 2 is from the Introduction to the Oresteia by Simon Goldhill, and he uses structuralism as a means of reading myth and story. So structuralism is based on structural linguistics. Structural linguistics has 2 main premises. One is that words in a language, any language, have no inherent meaning. The word chair does not necessarily mean chair. Right? There's nothing special about that. In Latin, that word would be cella or cathedra. Those are the 2 words in Latin that are chair. And there are in other languages, there would be different words for chair. So there's nothing in the sound chair or the spelling chair that actually indicates the thing you sit down on. That is purely arbitrary in a system of English language. And that words in a language mean what they mean in pairs of opposition. So chair as opposed to table, standing versus sitting, walking versus, lying down, right? So these things are sort of grouped in pairs. Black versus white, up versus down, white versus black, all those sort of differences, man, woman. Those binary pairs, that's sort of the thing that gives the words meaning. So they mean something in opposition to other things. And you can look at literature that way, right? So if you think of like cop movies, right? in the older cop movies or the crime dramas, the criminals are the bad guys and the cops are the good guys, right? There's no, I mean, there may be some dirty stuff about the cops or a little bit off about the cops, and there may be some good about in the bad guys, but clearly the lines are drawn. The criminals are the bad guys, the cops are the good guys. And so that sets up, and then things get organized according to that. I watch a lot of movies, and movies from the even 60s, but more from the 50s and before. There's usually, if it's a romantic film, there's usually the good woman, right? And that's the one who ultimately is going to end up with the main male figure in a couple situation by the end. And then there's the bad woman, right? The temptress. She might not be evil, but there's definitely something off about her. And that if the guy ends up with her, that's a bad thing. And there are clues, right, in the film that, like, this is the good woman and this is the bad woman. If you see these things, it's like you know what they are, right? Because they set up various clues to tell you this is good, this is bad. That's how structuralism organizes literature. And you can look at the Oresteia and see a structural pattern, right? You've got the male gods, Apollo and Zeus, telling Orestes to kill his mom, and you've got the Furies, who are female, opposing that. Apollo and Zeus are newer gods, the Furies are older gods, right? And so you get these binary pairs. And then what ideally happens in literature is that there's some figure that transcends those boundaries. And in the Oresteia, specifically in the Eumenides, that figure is Athena. She is a goddess, so she's female, but she aligns herself with the male civic justice as opposed to the Furies' personal vengeance. Right? So she transcends it and therefore makes it work. All right, so those are the sort of main things that I wanted to point out for this week's readings. Keep up the good work, and I'll see you next time.